Hi everyone, and welcome to this talk about the regulation of artificial intelligence risk in the financial sector. Very happy to be here, and we're going to discuss how the AI is impacting the financial industry, and especially from the risk side. So what I will always say is that where the consultants are responsible for showing what the benefits of artificial and opportunities of artificial intelligence are, regulators are there to address the risks. So that's what I will do today. I will address the risks and also how we can regulate those risks and what the challenges are from a regulatory perspective to regulate artificial intelligence in an appropriate way. Some short comments about myself. I work at the Dutch Central Bank, and I'm a policy advisor in Fintech and artificial intelligence at the Supervision Policy Department. So basically, I look at how to regulate artificial intelligence in the financial industry. And I work in different European and international work groups around the regulation of AI. And there you see very different approaches from different regions of the world. We will touch upon that later on. So the first thing that's very important if you want to look at AI from a policy perspective is that you need a good definition. So what you see, what I see is that there has been a lot of discussion going on about what the definition of AI actually is. So on the one hand, it's really the discussion between the more policy-oriented people and the more data science, technology-oriented people, where the technology-oriented people really think about AI in terms of the deep neural nets, deep learning, etc. So more the complex, more modern forms of AI, where the policy perspective focuses more on the broader definitions. So the definition I always like to use is the definition of the European Commission High-Level Expert Group. And there are some elements that are quite like in this definition. So, for instance, the mentioning of both the hardware and software elements, because a lot of people don't understand that you don't always have to see the AI, and also the mentioning of the specific goals that are implemented in artificial intelligence, because I think that's a very important element that we have to, if we want to regulate, that we look at the actual goals and the goals surrounding and the sub-goals of the main goal that's implemented and programmed in the algorithm. So if you ask me what the definition of AI is, this is it for me. I'm not going to read it or discuss every sentence, but I think it's very clear to establish that this is what we are actually talking about. So this means that AI, from a policy perspective, from my perspective, it is symbolic AI, rule-based algorithms, but also deep learning, self-learning algorithms, and machine learning, etc. So if we look at AI is what we call a general purpose technology. And we have seen a couple of these technologies over the years. And they are mentioned here on this slide. This is a slide from the Dutch Government Council, the Scientific Council of the Dutch government, and they made this picture. And what they actually say is that artificial intelligence is a new general purpose technology. And what this means is that, first of all, that AI is present in all sectors. So it's not only present in, for instance, technology, the tech space, or in the financial industry, or in healthcare. It will impact every single industry of society, basically, of economy and of society. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that there are real technological improvements. So this basically means that there will be higher productivity and lower costs in, for instance, production, and this is definitely what we see happening with AI. Some processes are able to be way more effective and cost effective and more productive than before. And the third criteria for general purpose technology is that there's also innovation surrounding the implementation of the technology. So this means that there are also things going on that are not directly connected to the technology. So, for instance, here you can think about things like quantum computing, but also the development of 5G, that there's always internet present. So for instance, self-driving cars need internet all the time. So therefore you need a very good 5G network. But you can also think about innovations in the environment that AI will be placed in. So this is what we call envelopment. And envelopment means not innovation of the technology itself, but innovation in the context that the algorithm or the AI model will be placed in. So here you can think about, for instance, again, if we talk about self-driving cars, here you can think about how we should make innovations of our road systems. So, for instance, we should say on the highways that you are only allowed to drive autonomously and not within cities, because it's too difficult for the model to work perfectly in cities. So we should also look at how it is innovating the world we are living, and also, for instance, in how companies are managing their internal processes, for instance, IT infrastructure. So AI is definitely a general purpose technology from our perspective. And this means that we don't already know what the definite impact will be on society. And this is also very, I think, makes it very abstract at some point, until some degree, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to look at it, and we don't have to look at regulating it, because there are definitely some risks involved next to the opportunities of artificial intelligence that are quite obviously there. But how intelligent is artificial intelligence? I think that we should keep in mind that currently AI is able to do very specific tasks very well. And what I always like to mention is the AI paradox from Moravec. And what he said is it is comparatively easy to make computers exhibit adult-level performance on the intelligence test or playing checkers, and difficult or impossible to give them the skills of a 1-year-old when it comes to perception and mobility. So what it basically means is that what a lot of dystopian stories are telling us is that the AI will take over the world, etc., and that there will be artificial general intelligence, and we are a long way from this situation right now. So the situation where there will be an AI that will be intelligent in all different ways that humans are intelligent in is not within reach. And I honestly doubt if it's really going to happen in the same way that humans are intelligent, because the way that AI's intelligence is very different from a human intelligence. So I think there are two very big distinctions. The first one is basically the common sense element. For AI, it's very difficult to learn very commonsensical things that humans just take for granted. But if you don't know these things, it's very difficult for an AI to operate in the human world. So that's one thing, the common sense element. The second one is more the side of the emotions and motivations that humans have. So this basically goes back to the limbic system of the human, where the AI is really doing what the neocortex in our brain is doing. In our limbic system, the motivations and emotions are present of human beings, and an AI is not. It's very difficult to program emotions and motivations that are comparable to those of humans in an AI. So this means that in a social context, it will be very difficult for an AI to interact with humans. And this is what Steven Pinker also mentioned, is if he talks about the dystopian visions of AI, he says intelligence is not the same as dominance. So if an AI is very intelligent, it doesn't mean that it will take over the world and humanity, etc. So what kind of applications of AI are there? I don't go too deep into these, but I think that the same applies to the applications as to the definitions. At some point, we just have to say, these are the applications. And from my perspective, these are the applications of AI. So it's good to conclude that these are the areas, and they can be combined, obviously. So, for instance, robotics almost all the time has some combination of the other elements, and maybe you could also include rule-based algorithms in there. But I think this works, so I really like this. So how should we regulate AI? So I think it's very good to mention that there are two dilemmas that we have as a regulator. And the first one is basically the Coleridge dilemma, what we call the Coleridge dilemma. It's very familiar in the literature as well. And what this basically means is the question around when to regulate. So first of all, if you regulate too early, you don't have any idea how the technology is going to develop in the future. So therefore, basically, the regulation will not be sufficient to mitigate all the risks that will follow from the use of the technology. So if you are too early, you cannot predict how the technology will impact society, and therefore the quality of the regulation will likely be not very good. So not good enough to mitigate these risks. But if you regulate too late, and I think that we have seen this in the internet with the big tech players, if you regulate too late, then the impact of the regulation is very limited because there are already structures in place, and these structures are very, very difficult to impact and to steer. So therefore, you as a regulator, you really have to find the sweet spot of when to regulate. And this basically means, I think, that when an AI, for AI, it means that if what we see now is that AI is moving into society more and more, and I think therefore it's a very good point to regulate it at this point. And secondly, the dilemma that we have as a regulator is that we want to regulate, so we want to mitigate these risks, but we don't want to kill the innovative capabilities of artificial intelligence. So there we look at, okay, how can current regulation apply to artificial intelligence? At first use this regulation, and only if there are risks left that are not regulated by current regulation, we can add new regulations. So, for instance, the AI Act that we will touch upon really tries to do this, and at some points really tries to stay close to current regulations. So, for instance, GDPR. So these are the two dilemmas for regulators. So, what do we need to do? If we want to regulate, so we should go from reactive to anticipatory regulation. So if we see the development of artificial intelligence, it's very important not to wait for the risks to happen. We have seen this with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the impact on our democratic processes of these algorithms, that we should really look at the future and try to predict how AI is going to develop and regulate the potential of the future. Secondly, we should also focus on the digital environment. So what I mentioned before with the envelopment, that we should not only regulate the technology, but also the environment that the technology will be placed in. So for instance, like with the self-driving cars, we should also look at road regulations if self-driving cars are used on the roads. Thirdly, data privacy is very, very important, and I think we should also keep in mind that GDPR already gives us a lot of norms that can help us mitigate the risk of artificial intelligence. But we should always keep it in mind because it's a very big risk of artificial intelligence. And lastly, we should also focus on the concentration of power and lack of competition. And this basically means that a lot of the AI tools that are out there are connected to very dominant players, mainly cloud providers, that they provide cloud services, and those cloud services also include artificial intelligence. And these big tech companies also are the most advanced companies in the AI space. So I think we should also look at the competition, the regulation of the competition within markets and concentration of power. So what is currently going on? There is an AI Act that from the European Union, and currently it's under negotiation. It was presented in April 2021, the first version of the text. The second text was presented in November 2021. And what this regulation will basically do is, it's a horizontal regulation, so it applies to all sectors. But it's not the case that all AI applications will be regulated. So what the EU did is that they made 4 risk categories, and the different risk categories have different regulatory pressure, or there's more regulatory norms that apply to these AI applications. So basically, we have an unacceptable risk. So then the AI application will be forbidden. So this is basically the case with facial recognition or algorithms that cause harm for European citizens, etc. Then you have the high-risk applications, and there are, they mention a few, so it's a bit too much to go deeper in them, but there are some requirements for companies that want to use high-risk AI applications. There are some requirements, especially in the risk and compliance processes of these companies. Then with limited risk, there are only some transparency requirements in the regulation, and with minimal risk, there are no requirements following from the regulation. So what this basically means, and what the EU is saying, is that not all AI applications will be regulated. What will be regulated is mainly the unacceptable risk and the high risk AI applications. And I think around 80 or 90% of the AI applications that are used today will fall within the limited or minimal risk categories, and therefore won't be impacted by this regulation that much. What also should be mentioned, if that very professional organization that already have a very good risk and compliance processes, that for them it won't be a very big adjustment if they are already implementing models in a very responsible way. So the goal of this regulation is basically to protect customers and European citizens. So it's really about the customer protection, human dignity side of the of artificial intelligence, and I think it's very clear that AI is impacting those types of those things in European society at the moment. So this is really a risk-based regulation, and I think it's very good. It's a very good way to look at AI, and it's also flexible in a way. So this means that that AI applications can move up to the high risk category later on. So there will be an assessment every. It's not clear how many times a year or how it will happen, who will decide, but it will be possible to add new high risk AI applications to the upper categories of this pyramid. So to assess what the risks are, currently at DNB we are looking at the different risks of artificial intelligence in academic research. So what we do as central bank is basically we look at the macro-prudential risk of artificial intelligence and at the micro-prudential risk of artificial intelligence. So what it basically means that if we look at macro-prudential risk of artificial intelligence, we look at the big risk. So the big risk for the financial stability, right? So here we look at what will really impact and shake society and the financial system in such a way that the impact is really, really great. If we look at micro-prudential risks of artificial intelligence, we really look at the individual financial institutions and how AI may impact those individual financial institutions. So there really is more about the solidity of the financial institutions, and with micro-prudential risk, it's more about the impact on financial stability. So I don't have time to touch upon all these risks, but I will go into some of them, which I think is very interesting and is not mentioned that much. So what we see is with for instance, intelligence explosion. It's been discussed. It's been discussed in the literature quite a bit, and this basically means that if we reach artificial general intelligence, so if AI will become smarter than human beings, what should we do then, right? So we are thinking about what we should do if this point will be reached. And I think this point is also addressed in the AI Act, where general purpose AI is mentioned in the text as well. But we are also looking at this at what will happen. Obviously, we are also looking at job destruction. This is a very important topic, and We have seen research coming by over the last 8-9 years. And what I think is very important to mention here is that AI won't take over jobs. AI will take over tasks. So what we mentioned before with the AI paradox is that AI is able to perform very specific tasks very well. So this means that also within the job market, AI will be able to perform very specific tasks within jobs very well. So this means that we really have to look at how man-machine interaction can be used in such a way that productivity and outcome of economic processes will be best. So I think this is a different shift a thinking shift from, okay, AI is going to take over our jobs to, okay, how are we going to work with the machines to be more effective and efficient? Another one that's very important is algorithmic interaction. We have seen this with flash crash, with trading algorithms that are interacting with each other, and therefore an unwanted outcome result. There's an unwanted result where we don't understand what happens. So basically, this is a black box within a black box, right? So sometimes we don't understand the trading algorithm, how it works, but we also don't understand how the interaction between different algorithms works as well. Then also very important is the sustainability element. So if we use AI more and more, a lot more processing power will be necessary to train those models. To train those models, you need processing power. So you need a lot of energy to do these calculations. So for instance, if you will use just these servers that you see on the picture, or maybe use a supercomputer, that will cost a lot of energy. So this means that there also will be sustainability issues around. So if we will use AI more and more, we will have to look at how we can use the energy more efficient. So for instance, with new chips or maybe with quantum computing, but this is an issue that is not addressed that much. And I think that we should definitely look at as a risk for the future. Then, if we look at micro-prudential risks of artificial intelligence, I think the first three are the most well-known. I always call these the big three of AI. So bias, discrimination, black box explainability, and privacy issues. Those are the big three. And I think most people will know this. There are some things that interest me a lot as a regulator. So what interests me a lot is obviously these top three, but I won't go into them because they are, I think, very well known. What I find very interesting is the responsibility gap. And this, again, touches upon the man-machine interaction. So what this basically means is that managers and boards of companies don't take responsibility for the outcome of the use of AI within their companies because they think, oh, it's technology. Technology works way better than human beings. Therefore, we don't have to take responsibility for the results of the algorithm because it will work. And I think this is not going to fly, right? Because if you are a board member or you are the chief risk officer, etc., and you use models for instance, to identify criminals and terrorists, if you are a bank, those models should work, right? So you should really monitor the risks of using these models, and you should also be held responsible if something goes wrong. For instance, if one of the big three risks mentioned before will apply to one of the models that you have, and actually we have seen this happening. We have seen people that are responsible higher up in the organization not taking responsibility for the use of technology and AI within their organization. And we think this is very, very important. So we think that an AI governance structure should be in place, and it should always be clear which person, which individual is responsible for which model and which AI application. Another thing that is important, and I will close with this, is the gaming of the algorithm. So this is really the trade-off between transparency and black box. So we see a lot of pressure on the need for algorithms to be transparent. But what will happen if an algorithm is transparent is that we know how it works. And if we know how it works, we can adjust our behavior in a way that is not very pleasant to get good outcomes from the algorithm. So for instance, if we use an algorithm to detect financial economic crime and we make this algorithm transparent, it's not something we want, right? Because then the criminals can find ways to bypass the the thing the algorithm looks at, and find ways to not be detected by the model. So I think this is a very good example of where black box actually can be useful, and where algorithms can be gained. So I will now close, and thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any further questions, please contact me via email or LinkedIn. And have a great day.